Okay, so here's a little tutorial on how to spin your own yarn. So I just measured out how much fleece I want to work with, and now I'm taking my rings off so less fleece, less fibers get caught in my own rings. So now I'm taking the piece of fiber and I am ripping, like pulling it apart so I have thinner, smaller pieces to work with, because if I were to try and spin that whole thing, I'd have to do a lot of drafting and it would just be too thick and it just wouldn't work. So I am splitting it vertically into 3 sections and I'm doing my very best to keep it all like one line. So you can see I'm carefully just pulling it apart, not aggressively, um, just gently pulling it apart. So I have one piece and I'm putting it off to the side. And now I'm just going to separate my last piece into two. And normally within the fleeces you see spots where it's either been folded or like predetermined places where it'd be a good idea to split them. So now what I'm working on is I am pre-drafting. That is when you pull the fleece and you pull the fibers out and apart from each other so they're nice and separated and it's not too tight. And here it was when I realized that I had the wrong spinning tool in. So what I'm just doing is I'm carefully taking it out and apart, because that is the top spinning tool for when you are plying yarn. So right now I'm just putting in the one where you spin and just putting it back into place where it's supposed to go. Stick in between two circles, it's called a bobbin. So if some of you sew, you might know, you might have worked with or seen a bobbin before, and it's just a plain bobbin that will wind the newly formed yarn onto. And now I'm just threading the lead in through so I can get it nice and stuck and it will thread onto the wheel properly and I'm all good to go. So after that little break, I'm going to go back to pre-drafting and just carefully, easily, delicately pull the fibers apart in a vertical fashion so they're lined up vertically, just spread out a little bit. Sometimes I pull it a little bit too far apart and it gets really thin and separated and it runs the risk of it falling apart, and this is one of the reasons a lot of people don't like to pre-draft, but I found that it works really well for me, and I just try and be more delicate on the parts that are thinner, and if it breaks apart, then that's okay. I can fix it while spinning. So you see how on one side the undrafted stuff is more dense and colors are like more compact. That's because of they're more compact. All the fibers are all pushed together, and so drafting just helps pull them apart, and that's why it looks so much fluffier. Now I'm just putting it all off to the side so I can spin with it in a few. Now I'm just squishing the starting piece of fiber in between the two pieces, which is the lead, and then I'm going to start treadling, making sure the wheel is going one way and one way only. So for this, I spun it so it would go to the left, I believe. And sometimes getting started can be a little bit difficult, but that's okay because you just keep moving. You just let it wind, and every now and then you have to adjust the tension to see how far it should pull, or like how fast it should pull the fiber onto the bobbin. So every now and then there's a little piece of metal that threads the yarn onto the bobbin, and you have to manually move that up and down. So you continue treadling with your feet. Sometimes there's one pedal, on this one there's two, to keep the wheel moving in the direction you want it to. What a lot of people think is better is moving faster, but that is the opposite of what you want to do. Nice, slow, steady treadles with your feet. So every now and then your fiber will break off, and that's okay, because you just want to get you just want to pull it so the end little wispy pieces are exposed, and you want to put that right up to the last piece of yarn that you have spun. So then when you start spinning again, those little wispy pieces catch on to yarn that you have made, and it continues to work. So if I was making a nice really long piece of yarn, then I could continue working when I run out of this piece of fleece, so I could just put another fleece behind it by doing the same technique. I have the fiber trapped in the 2 fingers, and then my hand behind it, I am pulling and doing some more drafting. So because I like to pre-draft, I don't have to draft as much and pay as much attention to it, so I can really pay attention to the thickness and the quality of the yarn that I'm spinning. Alright, so now I'm beginning the process of plying the yarn. So I'm grabbing this little contraption called a Lazy Kate, which kind of sounds like a Lazy Susan, but it's not. It's a Lazy Kate, and they're very different. So I'm unloading my bobbin from the wheel that I just had finished spinning. Very carefully grab it. And so now I am loading the 2 bobbins onto the Lazy Kate, and I want to make sure that my yarn faces the same direction. So with that bobbin, it's coming out from behind on my right side, so I want to make sure with the other bobbin it comes out and behind on the right side as well. So now I'm taking the string and I'm loading it around the 3 bobbins, and I'm just tightening it to make sure that the tension's even, and it helps keep them all spinning at the same time at the same speed. Get that nice and loaded, and now I am switching my bobbin loader into the type that is intended for plying. So I'm taking the little piece of wire that's connected to the wheel off, so I can slide out the top, and now sliding in the second type, I'm putting the wire onto the bobbin loader that is intended for plying, and this one comes with a special bobbin. So the gears mesh, and the piece that loads them turns and moves up and down at an even pace. So I put the Lazy Kate on the floor, and I get my bobbin all ready. So Lazy Kate kind of just acts as a way for the yarn to unwind in a controlled manner, because I don't want it spinning all over the place and getting tangled within each other. So I'm just getting everything, trying to get my tension set, getting the bobbin loader in the middle. And the tension is just how much pull. So sometimes you want the wheel to pull your yarn onto the bobbin faster, and sometimes you want slower. So I'm getting nice and comfy, my feet set up, and I'm grabbing the 2 pieces of yarn from the Lazy Kate. And this next note is important. So you grab the 2 pieces from the Lazy Kate and you put them together. You sandwich them in between the two grabbing strings, the loading strings, that's what they're called, and you spin the wheel the opposite direction as you did initially. So first I spun it to the left, and now I'm spinning it to the right to ply it. So I have the 2 pieces next to each other, sandwiched together, and just very, very little treadling works really well, because I don't want the pieces to be wound together super, super tight. I just want them to work together. So for this, I use both my hands, one of which is controlling how much twist I'm putting in the ply, and the other is just trying to keep the 2 strands separate until they're supposed to meet. So I'm just pulling my hands back, treadling very slowly, as you can see, pulling my hands back, and then once the length of the yarn is where I want it, I then push my hands and also the yarn forward into the bobbin so it loads quite nicely. When I get to the end, I work similarly as I do with just regular spinning yarn on the bobbin. So I work till I get to the end of one piece, and I untangle it the best that I can from the two loading pieces, and I want to get them nice and separated to not only preserve the quality of my yarn, but to preserve the two pieces loading. Now for a really fun process of unloading the now spun yarn. And only in editing did I notice that this is hard to see, but you're going to take your newly plied, newly spun yarn, and you're going to load it onto this mechanism called a niddy noddy. Now the niddy noddy is a way of measuring how much yarn that you made. And so you go ahead and you hold one piece towards the middle and you start wrapping best that you can. So I did the middle, and go up and around and then down and around, and you kind of make like an X shape, or kind of like two like triangles that make up a square. It's kind of hard to describe. It's much easier to do and show in person, but I'm just loading it. And so on the peg that I started at is where you would start counting to see how many yards that you made. So I think with this niddy noddy, when you go around one full time, that is 1.5 yards. So each time that you go around, it's another 1.5 yards. But for here, I wasn't counting. And I'm just loading on the best that I can. And you want to pull it kind of taut and to keep everything secure in place. So once I've run out, I'm taking my pre-cut pieces of additional string. Here I'm just using twine because it's what I had, and I'm going to tie 4 knots on the 4 different legs. So I have one just to keep everything together and to make it easy and visible for when I unwind it to spin it, not to spin it, shoot, when I unwind it to knit with it and work with it. So I'm just tying a piece of twine around each different leg and getting as much as everything as I can encapsulated so it doesn't, nothing slips out, it all stays in its place. Once all 4 legs have been tied around, you just carefully slip it off, and you just move the niddy noddy out of your way, and you take your now circle of spun yarn, and I like to put it on my wrist, and then I just start twisting it in one direction, just to get some nice twist in there. And then when you get it close together, it will curl and make a nice little loop, and so you put one end through the other, and so even though the colors are kind of hard to see, you now have a skein of yarn, and it looks just as you would buy it in a yarn store.